Hello and welcome to another SDA Q&A. My very special guest today is Cal Stewart. How are you, Cal?
Hey, man. Good. I'm always good. Thank you.
That's good and great to have you here. Welcome, everybody. I put a promo post up a couple of days ago that we were going to be having this chat today, this discussion, this interview. And over 11 or 1,200 people have engaged with that promo post. So what we're going to be talking about is an interesting topic, and one that obviously I think is close to a lot of people's hearts, and which is this kind of celebration of the 70's gospel movement, where there were many friendships formed. And last weekend you had a reunion called a celebration of the 70's gospel friendships.
That's right. You're right.
And all the feedback I'm getting is that it was a great and resounding success. So
it was beyond my expectations, and I'm so happy the way it turned out. Yeah.
that's fantastic. Me too. I'm really pleased for you, and Cal, you've done a great job, and in pulling that all together. So look, just before we start, I wanted to just give a quick read of what Wikipedia says about the Jesus movement in general, because it was something that did really take the world by storm in the late 60s and early 70s, and found its way into Adventism. Some were greatly shocked by that. Others welcomed it and embraced it. So I'll just read that out just to kind of lay a bit of a scene set the scene for this conversation. And by the way, those that have joined us, please just lean forward, click the like button in Facebook or on our YouTube channel. Subscribing and liking really helps. It's very easy to do. Even go across to YouTube and look up SDAQ&A and just follow us there. Really, really helps. And it allows me to kind of bring new content into this sphere. By the way, this is season 5, episode 1. I thought it was such a landmark conversation, I'd start a new season from it, Cal.
Well, there you go. I won't charge you for that. It's all right.
And we were chatting off air that we think it'd be a great idea to turn this into a bit of a series. So this can be part 1 of a series where we chat to a lot of people that were there at the time. And you had a great idea too about connecting with the kids of some of these movers and shakers of the 70's, find out where they are now as well. So that I'm looking forward to that. So you and I will get our heads together and we'll write a list of names, and we'll pull together a bit of a series on this particular movement. So here's what Wikipedia has to say. The Jesus movement was an evangelical Christian movement which began on the west coast of the United States in the late 60s and early 70s, and spread throughout North America, Europe, Central America, Australia, and beyond, before it subsided in the late 80s. Members of the movement were called Jesus people or Jesus freaks. And I know that in the 80s, I kind of got on the tail end of this with bands and music and playing music on the street as well. And I know the musicians of that era embraced the Jesus freaks term there. And I wanted to just list, because music was at the heart of a lot of this as well. Many music groups developed out of this, and some became leaders within the Jesus movement. Most notably, Barry Maguire, Love Song, second chapter of Acts, All Saved Freak Band, Servant, Petra, Resurrection Band, Phil Keaggy, Paul Clark, Dion, Paul Stookie of Peter, Paul and Mary, Randy Stonehill, Randy Matthews, Andre Crouch, Nancy Honeytree, Keith Green, and of course Larry Norman. And within the Adventist Church,
I'm glad you never mentioned the King's Heralds.
They were a movement. They were part of a movement a little bit before that. And we had in Australia our very own Sally Hilda, produced, recorded, songs written by Bob Wolfgram and Lowell Tarling. This album had a huge influence on me. All My Friends Are Sinners. I think it's still available now. I know Dale Willis from the Media Centre released these on CD. This album was incredible, Refugee, Bob Wolfgram. So after that little bit of setting of the scene, Cal, tell us all about the reunion. Perhaps start there, and then let's meander back to the 70s and chat about how the movement in Australia began.
Well, if I can take you back a little bit before then.
Yeah, let's do that first.
I think we need to build a foundation on what took place in Melbourne at East Paran in particular. The 60s at Avondale were quite an amazing time. And by the time I got there in 65, or Des, by the way, he was there from 62. And by the time I got there in 65, you couldn't get a seat in his class.
Wow.
The word had passed around. It's like the colt from Old Regret had got away. You know, the man from Snowy River, you know. And anyhow, his classes became so full because people from around Cooranbong and elsewhere, people from Sydney would come up just to sit in his classes. The college had to make a ruling that if you weren't registered as a student and in that subject, you couldn't go in any Des Ford's classes. That's because there was no room for the students. So it was an incredible time. The gospel became centre and front, the focus and the mission of Avondale. It took over, and righteousness by faith was the catch cry. And so, of course, prior to this, Robert Brinsmead was on his perfectionist horse.
Mm.
Des was responsible for turning him around. And Harry Ballas has written about this, and he said that Robert Brinsmead, when he went from his Present Truth magazine to his Verdict magazine, which had a worldwide audience, and the Reformation gospel was being preached in writing, and Robert also was travelling around doing seminars. Harry Ballas says that at that time, Robert Brinsmead was more important to the gospel movement than Desmond Ford. Now, that might have been the case at one particular time, but in my opinion, Des has outlasted Robert Brinsmead in his presentation of the gospel. And it was a clear presentation. And that's what got him into trouble. But I've gone ahead of myself.
No, it's good to have this information. It's good to set the scene.
I got to Melbourne after graduation, and that's where my association with the East Paran Church started. Jim Johansson was the pastor. He was a very charismatic fellow. He had been a youth director. He still saw himself as a young person, although I think he was probably in his 40s, and that means he wasn't young, in our opinion. But he drew a crowd, and he went to Avondale for a summer school in 1972. And Ford and Larendell, they were the main speakers. They were the main lecturers at that summer school. And when Jim came back, he had a much better understanding and grasp of the gospel. Fortunately, there was a good handful of us who'd been at Avondale for 4 or 5 years, and so we had a bit of an understanding. But Jim, when he came back at the end or in 1972, that's when became a very powerful gospel person. And if you didn't get to East Paran early, you wouldn't get a seat. It was standing room only. And
Wow.
and the idea of doing a reunion of that time, initially it was an idea that Robert Wolfram had. He rang me and said, "Cal, we've got to do this. Some of these people have fallen off their perch."
Mm.
And I said, "You're absolutely right." He said, "I'm going to let you organise this." And so he left me with the idea. He planted the seed, and I ran with it from there on in. And it's quite amazing how many people I was able to contact that I knew I did not have any clue where they'd all got to. And it
Amazing.
is quite amazing. But I want to pay tribute to the work of Desmond Ford here, because he laid the foundation. There wasn't a church, an Adventist church in Melbourne, that didn't have a young gospel preacher in it. You could go to any church in Melbourne and you could be assured of getting a good gospel sermon. They were exciting times. Incredible. Yeah.
I was a young fella. You mentioned off air Eric Magnuson.
Yes.
And my father was lecturing at Avondale at the time, and we were next door to the Magnuson. So Trevor Magnuson and I were really good friends. And we mentioned and in that time, even though I was young, like 7 or 8 years old, I remember going to church on Sabbath there at Avondale College. And this is, early 70's, a real buzz in the air. I'd look around and everyone was kind of excited and happy. And there'd be little groups with Bibles open, sitting around in little circles and on bean bags and pillows around the campus after church and after lunch and in the afternoon. I observed this exciting time. Tell us a little bit more about the actual time period, this excitement that you speak of.
Yeah. Well, the sad reality of it is that, and in my lifetime, this is the darkest time of my association in the Adventist Church. And for some of your listeners who won't know, my dad was a pastor, and I had my education all the way through primary, secondary, and tertiary in Adventist institutions. And so really that was my heritage, my culture. And so when the tide turned and these young gospel pastors were getting the guillotine, it was a very dark and sad time for me. Particular, I knew these people personally, plus I knew that if the gospel wasn't true, then we're wasting our time. And so it became a very personal thing to me and a very sad thing. And the byproduct, in my opinion, is that the Adventist Church in Australia has never recovered.
That's true.
And I don't think that I will see, well, I'm pretty certain that I won't see in my lifetime another Desmond Ford, another warrior. I'll call Robert Brinsmead a warrior for the gospel, because he was. And we couldn't wait for the next edition of Verdict to come out. It's kind of changed our lives. And I'll be surprised if there's ever two men that impact the Adventist Church like those fellas.
Well, I was going to go on and say that for me, when I then reached that time in the early 80's when I was able to kind of go out into the church, and I was looking forward to this kind of exciting time and the gospel and playing music around the place, I noticed this change had happened. And Glacier View, of course, had been only a year earlier.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, all you guys that had been around and so vibrant and exciting had kind of left or been cut off or marginalized or suppressed. And like you say, this beautiful time period was cut short. It had some embers still glowing in through the 80s, but essentially it was cut short. And that's sad. And I think you're probably right. The likes of the Dezers and the Brinsmeads, people that are really bold and want to preach the gospel as per the Bible, are not emerging anymore.
No.
And a quick plug for the book you mentioned earlier there, the one by Harry Ballas.
Yes.
Very hard to get a hold of. This is my copy that I've borrowed from Dr. David Thiel, which I'm looking after if you're watching, David. It's a really good book, Leaving the Adventist Ministry, and it documents kind of post Glacier View this almost focused attack on you guys that were there in the 70s to get rid of you. So that is part of the topic I want to kind of cover today. But I also want to talk about some of the movers and shakers of that positive era as well. So
Right.
perhaps let's turn our minds back to that for a moment and speak
Sure.
to some of these people like Bob Wolfgram and Johansson and these others that were really influential on you. Tell us a bit about some of those experiences.
Well, of course, in America,
people.
you had Larendel and Heppenstall, who were known worldwide within the Adventist framework as being great gospel men, right? And to a certain extent, what's his name now? Just forgotten. Never mind. Venden, Morris Venden, to a certain extent. But I went to a youth congress when he came out here, and he didn't really understand the full gospel. And I don't know. Des was also a speaker at that youth congress, and so it was a good time. And there was friendly debate going on, and I don't know whether Venden went back to America any the wiser, but he did have an impact in Adventism in America. But look, I don't know whether I sent you for our get together just gone, the reunion just gone this last Saturday. I looked at it and I thought, now, how do I tie all this in? And so we did a graph. Did I send you that graph?
I'm not sure about that. Let me have a look.
Yeah. So
is that like the
bubbles,
the circle Venn diagram? Look, I may have, while you're talking, I'll have a look and see, and I might be able to bring it up.
Yeah. Well, we had all these circles that were all related, and in the middle was the dynamic preaching of the gospel at East Paran, and that branched out to things like the street preaching, to the Food for Thought restaurant, to Share a Little Truth, which I'll talk to you about in a minute, to the Bible study groups that sprung up everywhere, to the wonderful music that was being produced. And I talked a little bit about the formation of Galilee Recordings.
Yes.
And also the introduction of Adventist forums in Australia. They all had their beginnings at East Paran in the 70s. Quite an outstanding time. And the stories that come out of that era from that particular church, I don't think has happened anywhere, but I might be wrong, but certainly didn't happen in Melbourne anywhere else.
I think that was ground zero for it.
Yeah, I think so too.
And it spread throughout Australia and New Zealand, but we, even in the early 80s, knew that it had come from you guys.
Yeah. See, and let me put it this way. The pipeline was so chock-a-block full of projects and ideas that stemmed out of the presentation of the gospel, which invited the Holy Spirit, which motivated all of us to go out and do stuff because we were excited about the gospel.
Yeah.
That's it, you know. And like, I'll give you one quick example. I found out on Saturday what actually happened to the company called Salt, Share a Little Truth. That's what it's called, Salt, Share a Little Truth. That company's still operating.
Wow.
And it's worth about $4 million.
What?
And they flew in a lady, her and her husband, who's now deceased. They have provided the funds for this company. You may have heard it. It's called Delahunty Park. No, you haven't.
I haven't heard of that. No.
Well, they do amazing things for kids on drugs and homeless kids.
Wow.
And they've been doing it for over 40 years. And
that is amazing.
Share a Little Truth has sponsored them for $5,000 a month for the last 40 years. and the assets have just grown, and the beneficiaries have been many, many needy and worthy people and outreach programs. We took a photograph this morning of one of the properties they bought for $1.5 million. It's an old chapel. I'll tell you what, it's magnificent. We went there this morning. We went out for breakfast, and I said to Yvonne, there's the chapel that they bought for $1.5 million. It's still going strong, and it's a community services building. An old, beautiful old chapel in Lilydale out of Melbourne. And
they grew out of this whole time period.
That's exactly right.
And that's incredible.
It is now,
and not what's sad is that it hasn't been uplifted within the Adventist Church. Like, no one knows about it. I'd heard nothing about that.
Well, the reason it's not part of Adventist mission is because Adventists didn't want it.
Yeah.
Because they weren't going to be controlled and told where money should go and what projects they should choose to do. And as in the street preaching, the conference wouldn't give the young people the use of the conference trailer unless they wore choir robes. We're talking about witnessing for Jesus in Burke Street in Melbourne, outside the big cinema complex.
Yeah.
And so the young people just laughed at him. Said, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Wear choir robes? Anyhow, there was a young businessman here in Melbourne who donated the trailer. And so that's just one small example.
I found that chart too, I think.
Yeah, that's it.
I don't know if we can see that or not. But
yeah.
Just go through a couple of those things there.
Yeah, well, as you can see, the large circle is the East Paran Church, the preaching of the gospel. And as a result of that, the Holy Spirit just moved on the hearts of these young people, and they went out. They weren't pushed out. They went out. That was their idea. Let's go and witness to the young people on the streets of Melbourne every Sunday night. And as a result of that, that's how the Food for Thought restaurant started, because the idea is we're contacting and making friendships with all of these young people, you know, who don't know anything about Jesus. Wouldn't it be great to have a place we could take them to? We didn't want to take them to a church. That'd scare them off. So so that the property in Chapel Street was bought, and we set about renovating it and setting it up as a restaurant. And that was very successful. And we had one chap give his testimony, two chaps on Saturday give their testimonies. One of them was a 16-year-old, and he heard about Jesus on the street from the young street preachers. He was invited to come along. He came along. He had started attending church. And Jim Johansson baptized him when he was 16-year-old. He was still at high school. And guess what? He still loves the Lord. He's the worship leader for Crossways Baptist Church, which has got a membership of about 6,000 people. And his testimony was unbelievable. Another chap, he didn't know his mum and dad. He grew up in institutions, in foster homes. And he was wandering the streets of Melbourne, and he listened and stopped. We'd get 1,000 people all surrounding the trailer. Some of them were hecklers. And one of the girls that used to get up and speak was Debbie Reed. That's Chopper Mark Reed's sister. And these hecklers, which they'd turn up and they'd, interrupt and heckle. And Chopper Reed went and got his bodgy boy mates, and the hecklers disappeared real fast. Now that was a great story.
Yeah.
And this guy, his name's Peter Burke. I hadn't seen him in 50 years. And his testimony was just amazing. He said he would have been dead. He would have died from drug overdose. And his testimony, he loves the Lord, and he reads his Bible every day. He talks to people and about Jesus. And we can multiply those stories on and on and on.
Let me bring up a couple of comments from the Facebook. This is Connie French. She, volunteered at Food for Thought for a bit. I interviewed Connie. Fantastic interview.
Hello, Connie.
And Russell Schultz has put, I thought everyone knew about this group. This is the Delhunty group you mentioned. There's a link to it there, delhunty.org.au. Go and check it out, everyone. And someone else has put up, Vendham was popular for his charismatic style, but he missed the point of the gospel and ran off down the perfectionistic path. But what you were saying earlier is that he seemed to grasp it for a little while and was able to kind of share it there as well.
He did dialogue with Des at that youth congress, and I think that's probably maybe 74. Someone might be able to correct me. At Monash University.
Right. And John and Linden have put, yay, Cal, all for Jesus. So it's good to see people joining in the conversation today. If you'd like to write a comment in Facebook, we've got a private group for SDAQ&A there. Go and look it up, join it, answer the questions, and you can get involved with the conversation, or simply follow on YouTube and just watch the interviews there. So any more stories you can share that kind of have come to the front of your mind? When we caught up a couple of months ago, I wished we'd recorded our conversation. It was amazing. Can you actually met Walter Ray?
Yes.
And did you were saying you did an interview with him? Can you just recount that story for me?
Walter and his wife Helen, they lived with us. They came. We brought them out, and they lived with us for a week while they were in Melbourne. But I'll get back to that. Let me just do it in sequence. Let me just finish. What a great day our celebration reunion last Saturday was.
Yes.
We sent out 100 personal invitations to people. after many months of tracking people down, and many more would have loved to have come. COVID stopped some. Others were living overseas or too far away. But in spite of all that, we had about 80 turn up.
Wow.
So that was a good day. And we initially had a little bit of hesitancy, let's put it that way and be kind, hesitancy from the pastor at the East Paran Church. And he was responding, I think, to a few people in his congregation who had been at the East Paran Church in the 70s, older people now in their 90s and late 80s. And for them, because most people don't like change, and older people in particular don't like change. And so it was a radical change that was taking place from a system where they had been taught that you got to be a good person to go to heaven. You got to do all these things for Jesus. Otherwise, you're going to miss out, to learning about how God loves them, and that, that it's already taken place. You don't have to worry about it. And that's what I love about Tarling and Wolfsgram's song. I'll just read it out. It was news to me. It was already done. Before my birth it had been won. It could not be earned before I was born. On Jesus' shoulders he carried my scorn. What a great lyric. That's just the first verse.
Yeah.
Now, if you
Is that
don't,
from this album?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, if you've never heard that song, the lyrics by themselves will blow you away.
Yeah.
But the melody, the tune that Robert wrote, those lyrics Lowell Tarling wrote. Robert wrote the music, and together they were a great combination.
Yeah.
Tarling and Wolfgram.
That's them on the back in the day, and Genelevich as well in the top there.
Genna was significant in that he put his money where his mouth was.
Yeah.
And he was on board with it too.
Yeah.
And I didn't know Genna as well as I knew Robert and Lowell, but I knew who Genna was. And so.
Sorry, I've made a mistake there. It was actually from this album.
Refugee, that's it, yeah. What was the one you put up before?
All My Friends Are Sinners.
I'll tell you this.
I'm pleased to plug both. Thanks, Yvonne, for the reminder there.
Yeah, now
that's a great album too, this one.
Oh, they're all good, by the way.
Yeah.
Just fantastic. And
I've got the third one there somewhere.
I was so much looking forward to having Robert come and speak to us, but unfortunately at the last moment there was he couldn't come. But Robert is brilliant, and by the way, so's Lowell. Yeah. But anyhow, so I digressed a little bit. Where were we up to? I just want.
That was my fault. You were reading the lyrics. You're reading the lyrics of that song.
Yeah, I can read the rest out if you want, but the refrain: "He carried my cross in silence. I should have walked that trail. My hands and feet have wandered. His hands and feet were nailed. My head has been turned. His crown with thorns, and he died for my failures before I was born." That's the gospel. And that's what we were honoring this last weekend, and it was brilliant. And we invited Peter Roenfeld to come and speak, and his topic was the good news. God declares us right with himself.
Mm.
Brilliant. It was a great day. And you see, Romans 1:16, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it's the power of God for the salvation of all who believed. And on the back of our program, did I send you a copy of our
No, I haven't seen the copy of the program.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
We've got a lovely photograph of the East Paran Church on the front, and it says, "Welcome to East Paran Adventist Church, a celebration of gospel friendships," and the date.
Hold it up in front of us. Yes, hold it up for us. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and then on the back, I pulled up a Lunig cartoon.
Oh yeah.
Did I tell you about this?
No.
Michael Lunig is a gifted cartoonist, and
yeah, I love Michael Lunig.
he got the flick from the Age newspaper, where he'd been the cartoonist for 50 years.
Yeah.
He got the flick there because when the COVID struck, and in Victoria, the Victorian government became a police state, he put up a cartoon, and it was a tank. There was, you remember the Tenement Square?
Yeah.
Where they had this tank and this one poor one man in front with this tank trained at him.
Yeah.
Well, Lunig turned the tank into a dirty big syringe.
Yes.
Anyhow,
he got the boot after that, didn't he?
The Victorian government the Chinese, they got onto the Victorian government, said, "You got to give this bloke the flick," and he got the flick.
Incredible.
Anyhow, I came up with one of his cartoons. It's called A Grain of Truth, and there's this little dude bent over, face nearly to the ground, and he's carrying this dirty big rock on his back, right? But burdens of life, the burden of guilt, sin, the burden and this is what it says: a grain of truth is what you need. Truth will find a way to grow. It starts as just a tiny seed. Germination may be slow. Gradually, then suddenly, a Holy Spirit will arrive. A shoot appears and dares to be. The grain of truth begins to thrive. How strange it is that truth will spark when propaganda steals the day. And as the world grows false and dark, the inner light will show the way. Here's a copy of it, and I thought that was very applicable and spoke volumes. I had a lot of people. I'm sorry, I haven't got that straight.
That's
a lot of people comment to me on that, and on the bottom of it, I've said, "The way, the truth, and the life." That's, of course, Jesus. Don't let this rattle you, I said. It's a paraphrase of John 14. Don't let this rattle you. You trust God, don't you? And trust me also. There is plenty of room for you in my Father's home. If that were not so, would I have told you that I'm on my way to get your room ready? And if I'm on my way to get your room ready, I'll come back to get you so that you can live where I live. And so that was the theme of our weekend. And I had people come up and say to me, one old lady, she said, "Kelvin, I'm terribly sorry. I misread you all those years ago." And she apologized. And Yvonne and I, we're in Melbourne for a couple more days. And on Saturday, we're going to go back to the Paran Church just to let them know that they're a significant mob of people still. They're only down to 20, would you believe? And like I said before, at one stage, if you didn't get there, it was standing room only.
Mm.
And if I lived in Melbourne still, I'd make sure that that church was rebuilt, like,
Mm.
membership wise.
Mm.
It's a grand church. It stands for the gospel,
Mm.
and it's in a city. So, mate, I tell you what, I don't know what they're doing. They should have that church packed.
Packed. Mm.
Should
Mm.
have, yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyhow, I'm wandering a little bit.
That's all right. Hey, I'm just putting up a link. It won't go to everybody apparently, but I'll see if it comes on here. This, I'll put it in the comments later, and I'll put it on YouTube later as well. This is the link to the meeting that you did.
Yes. Now,
So
by the way, Kenton Johansson, that's Jim
yes.
Johansson's son, he did the video at the last minute, and which we really appreciated.
Mm.
But he is a little bit worried. He thinks he's going to take that link down. So
Oh, okay.
if your viewers want to see the full program,
Mm-hmm.
get on there at
Real
the link
smart,
that you
real
put
quick.
up
Yeah,
before he
okay.
takes it down.
Okay. And
And
I'll get on to Kenton and see if I can get a copy of it, and he might be able to let me use parts of it.
Yeah, well,
Um,
he's going to put a copy on a DVD, so I'm happy to pass that on to you.
That'd be terrific.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
so he's a little bit worried and concerned that he hasn't got permission for we use some beautiful songs, and
Oh, I see.
I don't
Yeah.
know whether you got to have permission to use other people's songs or not.
Yeah, if you're putting it up, I'll chat to him because there's ways
You
around
chat
it
to him.
because it's an educational program that you've put on in a public space.
Yeah.
And YouTube would only suppress some of the audio if there was a problem.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
it's unlikely to be a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well.
you're allowed to present covers of music as long as it's in an educational forum, which yours definitely was.
Yeah. Well,
I'll chat to him about that.
the other thing he was a little bit concerned about is that I rang Brock Bastian. Brock, as a little boy, was a member of that church with his mum and dad, Lynn and Eric Bastian. And Brock's gone on to become a professor of psychology at Melbourne University. And I knew that his twin daughters, who were about 10 or 11, I knew that they were in the Melbourne Youth Orchestra. So I rang them. I rang Brock and said, hey, would you bring your girls along and they can do a special item? Now, I did that not so much because I wanted to hear the girls, but I knew they'd be good. I did that because I wanted to get Brock in, because you just don't ever know. It might touch his heart coming back to East Paran. And anyhow, he and his wife and his mother-in-law, they came and with
Oh,
the
wow.
two girls, and the girls did their item and did it well.
Yeah.
And so, but Kenton's worried that he didn't get permission to film it.
Yeah, no, I'll chat to him because there's no problems with that kind of thing
Anyhow,
if it's educational. Yeah.
If the worst comes to the worst, I'm getting a DVD of the day, which I'm happy to share with anybody. I'll give it to you, and you can do what you like with it.
Yeah.
But because Robert wasn't there, I did a little bit of a blurb on his work, his special gift in writing music, and David Stokes, I was hoping that he would do stuff on the formation of the Melbourne Forum, but he couldn't come either. So I did a bit of a blurb on that. It's quite amazing how that started. And it started, the forums in America started in around about 66. And they came about as a result of Roy Branson studying at Harvard. And one of the faculty members was an Adventist guy there. And he said to Roy one day, we should have a discussion group for all the Adventist young people in North America who are at university. And that's how the forum started. And of course, out of that came the Spectrum magazine, which is still going strong. And there's some great articles on Spectrum. And, you know, they started off they weren't trying to bring the church down. They were trying to include the church in what was happening in society, in the changes that were taking place, and in scholarship in particular. Let me just see if I've got it. Yeah. No, I haven't got it. Anyhow, I came up with a list of some of the speakers that we had in the Melbourne Adventist Forum for the first 2 or 3 years. Now, I don't know whether anybody is interested in it, but they're great, incredible amount of people. Very, very intelligent people, people that were interested in the growth of the church. People like Eric Magnuson came. He came and he said, look, I don't want to shock you, but it's highly unlikely that the earth is 6,000 years as we've believed. That was just one comment. But they all came. Yvonne's just brought it over to me. It's we had Ron Lawson, for example. Now, Ron is an Australian, and he was in Australia, and David Stokes and Leon Collette, Dr. Leon Collette, they somehow knew him, asked him to come and talk to us. And Ron Lawson was involved in the setting up of the forums in America. And he came to Paran, and
Wow.
I think this was about 66. Not 66, 76, sorry. And as a result of that meeting with Ron Lawson, that's how the Australian Adventist Forum started. And he said to us, you should talk to a bloke called Ron Numbers. And I'd read Ron Numbers' book, Prophetess of Health. I thought, strike me lucky. How come we weren't told about this? And so I rang the University of Wisconsin, where he was a professor, and I asked to speak to him and his secretary, and I introduced myself as living in Melbourne, Australia, and his secretary thought that I was ringing about Ron Numbers' trip to Australia to teach at graduate students at Melbourne University. I didn't even know who he was. And it turned out that Ron Numbers was in Melbourne there and then. And
I love that story. Incredible.
I got onto him.
Yeah.
And he came and talked to our forum group.
Amazing.
And it's through him. He said, now, I've only looked at Ellen White's use of contemporary sources in her day with respect to health. There's a bloke by the name of Walter Ray who's been researching, studying Ellen White from a theological perspective for the last 30 years. You should talk to him. And he gave me his number, and I rang Walter Ray and said, mate, would you come out and talk to us in Australia? We don't know anything about this. And we came up with the money to fly them out, and they came out and stayed with us. He said, I've only scratched the surface here. And it seemed to us that if he only scratched the surface, what else was there to learn? And I don't want to be negative. I don't mean to be negative, but of course, the church didn't want anyone to know about any of this.
Yeah.
And so as a result of bringing these guys out and other people that came to speak, Forum's got a bad name, and they said we couldn't use any Adventist-owned facility. So we said, that's okay. We'll take it elsewhere. And we hired other venues in and around Melbourne. And the list of our speakers is amazing.
Did you record some of those meetings? Because
No,
how
we
great!
didn't.
Yeah, it's a
No.
shame.
We weren't thinking about that. We weren't thinking about recording anything.
No,
we're
living in the moment.
Wished we had of.
Yeah,
very significant. We even had. And this morning, Yvonne showed me on Facebook a whole lot of messages from people. Jean, what's her name? Bedford. She worked with Robert Parr at the Science, and she had some reflections, and it's very accurate. Stan and Yvonne Woodbury, who we went and visited this last Saturday afternoon, Stan's 99, and Yvonne is 97. We went and visited them in their aged care facility. Yvonne's still got her marbles and she remembers things, and Stan, he's lost it, but they were significant people.
Yeah.
And they opened their house to many meetings, and Jean was right. We had some great people come and talk at their place. And one bloke that came, people will know who he was. He was at the Ellen White estate, and just his name's Ron Grable.
Oh, Ron was at one of your Spectrum meetings.
At one of our, yes, it was.
Wow.
Not a Spectrum Forum meeting.
Sorry, the Forum, but the Forum was a spin-off of Spectrum, wasn't it?
No, Spectrum was the spin-off of the Forum.
Right?
Yeah. Spectrum is just the magazine.
Yeah.
That wrote up the papers that were presented at their meetings.
Tell us about Ron's meeting.
Well, Ron, he'd come out with Ron Olson from the White Estate.
Yeah.
And they came out here because they heard that Walter Ray was coming out. So they wanted to come out to tell the Saints, don't go and hear Walter Ray.
Yeah, okay.
And they hired the biggest indoor facility in Melbourne, the Dallas Brooks Hall. And there would have been 3,000 or 4,000 Adventists there.
Wow.
And then the following week, the Walter Ray and his wife came out, and we hired a pretty large Methodist church just up the road from where the old Hawthorne Adventist School was. We had some connections. One of our Forum members played the organ for them on Sundays, and we got the use of their very large church for the Saturday. And Walter spoke morning and afternoon, and we had a packed church, and people couldn't believe their ears. And of course, because he was staying in our house for a week, that's all we talked about for a whole week. And he had suitcases full of stuff. He said, I haven't scratched the surface here.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting to note, and we had Fred and Rennie Veltman come and stay at our place too.
Oh, what?
Trevor Lloyd rang us up. He was at Avondale, head of education, and he rang us up and said, Kelvin, you should listen to Fred Veltman.
Yeah.
Can you host him if he comes down? We said, absolutely. So that he was a gracious man.
Yeah.
A lovely man. And it broke his heart.
Yeah.
And
well, he did an 8-year sanctioned he was sanctioned by the GC to do an 8-year study into it.
They did a study.
Plagiarism.
they did. The GC specifically asked him to do a study on the book of Desire of Ages.
Mm.
And he told us in confidence, he's now died. I think his wife Rennie is still alive.
Mm.
But he told us in confidence, he said, they'll never publish this.
Mm. Mm.
What I found out is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
This is the book Desire of Ages. This is
Yeah.
the book that the Adventists hold up as next to the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, it's a beautiful book. It's wonderful. You can learn about Jesus in that book, no question about it. But the tragedy is it wasn't a pipeline from God.
Mm. Mm.
And that's what the church has peddled all these years,
Mm.
the idea that it's all come from God. And Arthur Patrick was a dear man and a lovely person. And Arthur and Joan stayed in our house as well. We invited them to come and speak to our forum group, and they came down, stayed for a week, and we had lots of warm and friendly, open discussions. And his mother and father knew Ellen White when she lived around the Cooranbong area. And of course, Arthur was the director of the White Estate at Avondale. But they gave him the shove.
Yeah.
Sent him off to become a chaplain at the hospital.
What often in, like, I did as you know, the season 2 was on Glacier View. And another quick plug, because I think Harry is watching right now. We chatted earlier, Harry, about your great book, Leaving the Adventist Ministry, that documents this period of time post-Glacier View where many of these creatives and young Adventist ministers left the church. Through that second season where we had 86 interviews with scholars and academics and preachers and pastors now and past, present and past. In that and other interviews, I keep seeing this amazing bunch of people that were kind of coming forward in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and had a passion for the gospel, and they were bringing up this kind of new way of looking at things, and people were gravitating to them. I just keep feeling, what is it? Is it sad? I'm not sure what the word is, but how sad that these people are lost to they could have brought this beautiful thing into the space that could have really affected the world positively, and they're all gone.
Sad is too soft a term.
Yeah.
It's a tragedy.
Yes.
It put the gospel message within the Adventist community back years.
And like you said, it might not ever.
In fact, it took it
revive.
It took it to the years before Questions on Doctrine came out. Questions on Doctrine was, for some of us, the beginning of unopenness in the church. But what happened as a result of the gospel being powerfully preached, the opposition and the devastating results of that set the church back for 100 years.
Yeah, and like you were saying before, you doubt you'll ever see the likes of the Brinsmeads and Fords ever arising again from within the Adventist Church.
No.
It almost seems that anything from the Adventist Church, any kind of official statement, is just propaganda. And so if you're just pushing propaganda, you're not getting the real truth from people. You're not getting an authentic passion coming through. You're just getting, lines on a screen you have to read out.
Well, our conversation is tending to be a little bit negative now, and I don't want this.
Well, not negative.
I don't want to be the focus.
It's not negative.
No,
in the sense, it's negative in the loss. But
yes.
What's wonderful is that there are people like this out there, and that they're still alive, and they were still being represented at your reunion. And I don't feel down about anything. I feel excited. In fact, my brain's whirring in that how fantastic if we can interview some of these people and
Well,
bring
you
back
need
this
to.
amazing kind of time period into the forefront, and not just make it a nostalgic
No,
kind of
that's
thing.
exactly right.
Yeah.
You need to talk at some stage to the likes of Gavin Grosser, who, by the way, he was our host for the day, and he did a great job. Thank you, Gavin, if you're watching. That was brilliant. He just brought it all together. And we had Adrian Jones. He gave some comments on the mushrooming of the Bible study groups. And he said, look, we'd have every second night, we'd have prayer groups and Bible study groups that would go for hours into the early hours of the morning. And for me, from what I've read of history, this is what was happening prior to 1844, when the Millerite movement went through the east coast of America, and people were impacted, and they were in prayer for hours. And now that was a prophetic movement, which we know that was wrong. But I don't think you can deny the fact that Holy Spirit these were great people, by the way, these early Adventists. They were incredible people. They were wrong, but they were incredible people. Now, this is an aside which you might find interesting. At the East Paran Church, they've got a church key in one of those combination lock cases that's in the garden. And guess what the combination is? 1843. If you break in here, you won't get anything. And I thought that was incredibly intuitive.
Yes.
Someone had a great sense of humor there.
Yeah.
But,
Hey, let me bring up something Russell Schultz has said, which I'd like to just comment on. Tragedy, Cal. I understand it as a cultural clash, and the resistance to change is what set us back. The problem is we cannot revisit those times. So much is different, but we can revive the enthusiasm for the gospel. And part of the reason I wanted to chat to you today is to actually ignite a bit of a conversation that leads to some positive stuff in the here and now of igniting this enthusiasm that Russell just mentioned. And yes, to do that, you have to touch on a sort of a certain lament and tragic perspective.
Yeah.
But what really hit me about your reunion, as I watched the YouTube clip that you sent me, and in our conversation earlier, is, and the interest in it is that, hey, maybe it's not dead and gone. Maybe we can harness this enthusiasm within a lot of the people that are still alive, and present it to the public and reignite that passion.
Well, I'll tell you how you can do it. It's a very simple formula. Jesus said, "If I am lifted up, I will draw men to me." My experience is that the Adventist Church no longer lifts up Jesus. You're guessing, do I go to church and come home blessed? And the answer usually is no. Why? Is because I think the Holy Spirit has left, gone elsewhere. You go to other churches where the gospel's being preached, they're active like we were in the 70's at Paran.
Yeah.
Because the Spirit of God has gone somewhere else where it's welcome.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, I think for a time there, the Hillsong movement had that spirit and was brilliant worldwide. If you're following the news, you will probably see that perhaps that's not the case any longer. I don't know, because I'm not part of that organization. But years ago, we went to the Hillsong fairly regularly to their conference, and it was mighty. You could come away mightily blessed.
Mm.
Jesus was being upheld.
Mm.
And that's a simple formula.
Mm.
If I'm lifted up, I will draw all men to me.
Mm.
And Des used to say, lifted up. Who's he lifted up for? He's lifted up for you and me.
Mm.
You see, preaching of the gospel.
Mm.
Calvary and Pentecost. They're the two great historic truths of Christianity.
Mm.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, well, a quick plug for a program I'm putting on, Voice Life Fellowship, January 21, just down the road in Toronto, where we're hoping to gather together people that love the gospel, uplift the teachings of Jesus, enjoy food and music and conversation. And we're going to make it a monthly thing here in Toronto. So I'd love you to come sometime.
I will.
And
Let me know when it starts.
yeah, so it's 11:30, January 21. We've got what we're calling a J4 Cafe, which is Jesus and the Four Gospels, which will be soup and buns and conversation about the gospel. And then the afternoon, we've got a guest speaker at 2:00. But I'd like to see it as something that grows and continues on. And
Let's
so,
see if
yeah,
we can
you
make
and
that
Yvonne
happen.
would be welcome, and would love you to come and share sometime as well there.
Yeah.
But for anyone that's in the region, from Sydney to Nelson Bay and beyond and inland, if you enjoyed the gospel message of the 70s and you enjoy and enthusiastic about what the gospel can be now, this is not a movement or a church. We're just a gathering of people that want to break bread together and talk about the four gospels and the teachings of Jesus, which are actually relevant, and you can be agnostic or gnostic and gain a lot of meaning for your life from those four gospels.
Wonderful. That's a good idea, Pete. Yeah.
So tell us more about things that are on your mind that are sparked from the reunion, and any other memories that can come forward.
We had a wonderful potluck lunch too, by the way. One thing the Adventists do well, and that's food. And anywhere in the world you can go, and they've always got good food. So you've got to give them credit for that. And so, look, I enjoy. I go to quite a lot of reunions. I try and get to homecoming every year at Avondale because I had 5 years there, and I see a lot of people. And by and large, I come away blessed and happy that I had that experience, and I'm part of a small group that John Den's running at the hub on the Central Coast, and that's a very good group. John and Lynn do a fabulous job there of welcoming people, open discussion. It's not the norm. People have their opinions and they're allowed to voice them. We discuss them openly, and it's, they have little nibbles and snacks after, and once or twice.
I didn't know that. That's
Yeah,
great.
maybe every, I don't know, every 6 weeks or so, they get together for lunch. And
Here's an interesting thing. You said it's at the hub in the Central Coast. We're hiring the venue called the Hub also at Toronto. Isn't
there
that
you
funny?
go.
Yeah,
Not related.
no, separate. It's like a community center, but it is owned by some ladies who bought it in the 70s, in the early 70s, and they only hire it out to what they see as kind of good cause kind of groups. And there's only one lady still alive now, but there's a committee that runs it. But interesting that it's called the same thing. And I'd love to see John and Lynn at ours, and I'd love to come down to theirs at some point too.
Well, you don't have to be invited. It's 11:00. It follows the normal morning church service, which I don't attend. Yvonne does. I don't attend because of my deafness.
Mm,
If I don't have a hearing aid in, I don't hear. If I put my hearing aid in that venue, I don't hear because it's
right.
just all,
Background noise.
yeah.
Mm,
And so I just sit in the car and read, or
yeah.
but I can participate in the Bible study group because it's maybe 10 to 15 people in a small room, and there's no reverberations and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
To
Our venue
tell you
we're
the-
hiring has a bit of that problem too. So
yeah.
I've just bought a bunch of foam to donate to them to try and put around the walls.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So,
So back to the reunion. Other thoughts and memories that you can share?
well, one chap said to me, Cal, as good as this is, and we got 80 odd people there, he said, there's many people from that era who couldn't come. Maybe it's because we didn't give them enough notice, or could be that they're not interested anymore, or in some people's case, it was too painful because there were some disappointments that came out of that 70s era.
Mm,
Wasn't all peaches and cream,
mm,
and um, and I won't go into that. And some people, it was too painful to come
mm.
to that venue.
Yes.
So the
Yeah.
suggestion has been made, we should do this again some other time,
Good idea.
maybe at the Botanical Gardens, to bring your
Mm,
own picnic lunch, and you just come along and we sit around and chew the fat on the
mm.
great days that were involved in
Great idea.
all of those
Mm,
activities. So that's something that
yeah.
I might consider.
That's a good idea. Gavin Grosser has just written here, great day as we reminisced, food ample, fellowship superb.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's a good idea to do something like that again.
Yes, I wrote this comment down for myself. The day was inspired preaching, awesome music, thanks to Terry Boyd and James Cosio and Helena, whatever her name was. They did music great. And then at church we had more formal. We had the organ and piano. I don't know whether you know Di Robinson.
Yes.
She played the piano, and Nari McMahon, who's the resident
Mm,
church organist,
yeah.
she played the organ. It's a good organ. I've forgotten what it is now. It's a bit old, but it
Mm,
still gives, and it's a churchy church, and so
mm,
the sound, it's a good. So and at church time we just had a couple of hymns. I chose Des's favourite, "The King of Love, My Shepherd Is."
mm,
His goodness favours never.
mm, mm,
That was one hymn. Forgotten the other one now. And the older people, of course, warmed to that
mm.
more than the contemporary stuff. We had Matt Redman's 10,000 Reasons
Oh, yes, that's a
at
good one.
our 10 o'clock session. And what was the other one we had? What's his name, Yvonne? I can't hear what Yvonne's saying.
She might be able to type it for us.
It was a Getty song. Speak, O Lord. Speak, O Lord.
Right.
So they're contemporary songs,
Mm,
which some people knew, but anyhow.
mm, mm.
Oh yes, we had Phil Brown come and speak.
Wow.
You know Phil?
Yes.
Well, I look at Phil and his ministry as an extension of what took place at Paran. That's why I
Mm,
asked him to come along, even though what he did was in the late 80s and the 90s. He established the New Life Ministries out there in the eastern suburbs at Baronia and out at Bayswater. And he probably built that up to about 60 or 70 people on a regular basis, but it was
Wow.
a community church. It was open 24 hours a day, a drop-in centre, and they did a lot of stuff. They worked in schools with kids, developing relationships and influencing kids for Jesus. And they had psychologists give free advice. The centre was open for community. And I got to tell you, what he did was pretty good.
Mm.
And I told him, I said, Phil, you were ahead of your time and you're too progressive for the church.
Mm. Mm.
And you would have been much better to have gone on your own. And you would have had the freedom to do things, mix with other evangelicals. And, they did a lot of things. They had lots of things. They had a lawyer there that could give free advice. They had a naturopath. People could come and talk to, they had doctors involved. It was
Wow.
a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
Like Adventist churches, they meet, if you're lucky, a Wednesday night
Yeah.
Bible study prayer meeting, if you're lucky.
Yeah. Yeah.
They have a Sabbath morning Sabbath school followed by a divine church service.
Mm.
Some Adventist churches have an afternoon program. Some Adventist churches have pathfinders, and then they lock the church up for the rest of the week.
Yeah.
Whereas Phil's New Life Ministries was community open all the time.
What happened to New Life Ministries?
Well, there was some dissension. There were some people that wanted to take what they were doing to another level, and other people were restrained and resisted. There were personality problems,
Mm.
and burnout took place.
Mm. Mm.
And Phil wasn't getting support at all much from the conference, and at the end of the day, it all got too difficult. They did go from the New Life Ministry Centre in Baronia. They did take that to a bigger venue, which was a backward move because the venue was the old Croydon Adventist Church.
Right.
And as soon as they took it there, it pretty much came under the umbrella of Adventism.
Right. Can I ask a question? We've got the era you're talking about in the 70s.
Yeah.
You've got the post-Glacier View era that led to Harry writing this incredible book, which is very hard to get, by the way. I've seen it for $200 online, and as I said, I've been able to borrow a copy from David Thiel. But look at those two eras, this vibrant era of the 70s, this exciting time that you're talking about where people are starting up all these kind of independent ministries. When this other era that we saw happen within the Adventist Church, that pretty much has decimated this whole enthusiasm for the gospel in some ways. Why didn't you guys kind of network afterwards when it was all shot to pieces?
Well,
Why did you disintegrate?
No, we did.
Right.
You got to understand, Peter, that the Adventist Church made it difficult for us to operate and stay within the Adventist Church.
Yeah.
They wouldn't let us hold meetings, or they just were very controlling.
And they were good at not letting people like me that were the next generation hear about it either. We were it's not like social media these days. They were able to control the information we got as well.
Yeah.
We just thought you'd gone. We didn't know what was happening.
No, I'll tell you where we went.
Tell us.
Before I say that, I've got to tell you one other thing. Melbourne Adventist Forum probably lasted for 10 years.
Right.
And that folded because the majority of the people that were coming along, certainly those who were there initially in 76, in those 10 years, they had learned so much. They had been beaten around the head by the church so much that they eventually said, you know what? We don't want to belong to this organization anymore. And they quit. So if you've quit the church, you can't be involved with an Adventist forum.
Right. Oh.
And so, well, we
What
can't.
is that? Was that policy, was it?
Well, no, nothing to do with policy. It was to do with where life had taken us.
Right.
We were no longer Adventists, so we can't have an Adventist forum.
Yes, of course.
We could have a Christian forum or some other, and we did discuss whether we turned this into an open house Christian forum for any Christians to come and talk.
Yeah.
But you know what? We got burnt out.
Right. Okay.
And so that closed down.
Right.
When that closed down, there were a handful of us, Gordon Box, a wonderful guy called Don Powell, myself, Stan and Yvonne Woodbury were pretty much, David Stokes for a time, Robert Wolfgram was involved for a time. We started up the Eastern Hills Christian Fellowship.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And Jean Bedford mentioned this today, right? And we lasted for about 8 years.
Wow.
And then that closed down once again because some of us had got to the point where we no longer thought the Sabbath was a major concern.
Wasn't a salvation issue.
And so, and plus, it had sort of strayed a little bit from a pure gospel. It got into other things.
Right.
And so, for some of us, it was no longer relevant. And so we left that and it closed down. And we were blessed that Good News Unlimited started up. And Des came once or twice a year to Melbourne and held seminars. And I'll tell you a funny story here. Des would stay with us some of the time. Sometimes when he'd come to Melbourne, he'd stay with us. But we sensed that it would be better for him, give him more freedom. If he went and stayed in the Country Women's Association hostel, which was a beautiful old grand house in Toorak, magnificent, absolutely magnificent. And guess what? If you remember, it only cost you $60 a night. And so we became members so that when Des came, he could stay there. Anyhow, I'd go and pick Des up out at the airport. And prior to this, my dad had died and we were executors of his will, and we went through all his stuff and had to chuck it out or do whatever. And I came across a series of George Burnside tapes.
Mm-hmm.
So I kept them, not that I was interested. I was interested from a historic point of view.
Yes, yeah.
Now, George Burnside was very good. He was a great speaker.
Yeah.
He commanded attention, and he was good. His missions were good.
Yeah,
were
very
good.
popular.
I went to one when I was a boy at the Sydney Town Hall.
Yeah.
And I got into trouble because I chucked toilet rolls out of the men's toilet on the first floor. And I think if my dad hadn't been a pastor, I might have been banned from going. Anyhow, I kept these George Burnside tapes, And when I picked Des up at the airport, I had in my tape deck in my car a George Burnside tape, and I picked Des up. We got his bag, one bag only, and on our way down the freeway, I said, Des, I've got something I want to share with you. It's from one of your mates. And of course, mates was George had it in for Des Ford, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I pushed the start. I pushed the start button, and George Burnside had this amazing, distinct voice.
Yes.
And he had Des all the way down the freeway. Des laughed his head off. I said to him, I thought you'd be interested in hearing from one of your old mates.
Oh, classic. Do you know what I found interesting as I slowly, became aware of the politics in the early 90s of what had happened 10 years earlier? I came across a fax that had been sent around in the 80s around the Greater Sydney Conference. I think I'd love to cite it again. It was definitely a fax I saw. It's not someone telling me about it. And in the fax, the leadership was saying, it had sent out to all the pastors in that conference, do not invite Des Ford or George Burnside to be speakers at your church. And I thought, isn't that often the way with the Adventist leadership? They try and cut off both sides of anything and just kind of make everything mute in the middle, and then Adventist apologists come in and speak positively about, so anyway, that's just another interesting little aside there about George Burnside and Des.
Yeah, that's it.
So is there anything else you'd like to share for this? Will be part one. We'll have you back, and we'll definitely I'll chat with you straight after this meeting, and we'll start getting some lists of people we can invite to the program. And Gavin, would love to have you on the program. There's several people who've been watching today I'd love to invite onto the program, where we will talk about this era, this celebration of the 70s gospel, friendships, etc. And I think let's get enthusiastic and excited about what can move forward. Let some of the past go. Let some of the thoughts and feelings and angst for the past to dissipate, and talk about positively moving forward.
Yeah, well, that's a good idea. It's a pity Harry couldn't come. It would have been great to hear him again. In fact, we did have Harry come to speak at our forum group in Melbourne. And when I asked him, this was just after he'd written this book, he said, Cal, this is very raw for me. He said, emotionally, I might not be up to this. You understand that? I said, yeah, we'll all understand if you have trouble as you're speaking to us. And in fact, he did. He did need to take a break. But it was very raw, because here we have young fellows that studied for 4 years in theology. Pretty much that's all they were trained to do, become Adventist pastors. Now, a few of them, like Harry, saw the writing on the wall and went off and did postgraduate studies and carved out a career for them very successfully. And others too, like Gavin, he got into his line of work as a celebrant, and he does a great job. And Adrian Jones is now a doctor of naturopathy. So there's others like John Hammond in Sydney. Have you talked to John Hammond? Not John.
Yeah. John, his brother. Yeah.
What's his brother's name?
Just cutting off there for a second.
I can't remember his name.
Hang on, I'm having a little problem with your audio. Just 1 second. Hang on, hang on. I've got you back now.
Yeah,
sorry, what were you saying? You were working out which Hammond
Yeah,
it was? It was
John Gordon.
Gordon Hammond was.
Have you talked to Gordon?
Yes,
Hammond?
I've interviewed Gordon and Harry in season 2.
Oh, yes, I saw that interview with Harry. Yes,
and interesting that like 40 years later, you could tell it was still difficult for both of them to kind of talk about, even though they both moved on and have done amazing things.
Well, that's true, because it's when you're told you're not wanted anymore, and after 4 years of training in theology, and that's what you've got your heart set on, being a pastor, for an organisation to cut your throat for no other reason, in many cases, apart from the fact that you preach the gospel.
Mm.
How does that work?
Mm. Mm.
So when you hear someone like Harry talking, he's talking out of a first-hand experience.
Yes.
Here's his mates getting their heads cut off.
Yeah.
And I found it difficult for years.
Mm.
And I fortunately didn't study theology.
Mm.
Just imagine. I mean, I studied education, and I remember that I decided I didn't want to apply for church employment.
Mm.
Trevor Lloyd knocked on my door at Watson Hall and said, "Kelvin, I see that you haven't put your name down for employment." I said, "No, Trevor, it'd be a silly move. It's like square pegs in round holes." And
Good on you.
I'm so glad that
Yeah,
I made that decision back then when I was at Avondale.
Mm. Are you still officially an Adventist?
No, I withdrew my membership and haven't worshipped in Adventist churches for years, until we moved to the Central Coast, and Yvonne said, "You should come and listen and be part of John Den's Bible study group." And I did, and I have enjoyed it, and it is good. And it doesn't.
John and Lynn are amazing, aren't they?
But I have had an interest all these years. I've got friends, sadly, who are not Christian at all. I've never got to that stage where I gave Christianity away. I just didn't feel that the church was providing. Well, it wasn't working for me, and it works for some people. I've got friends in Melbourne, and they regularly go along to Adventist church, but they say they're social Adventists.
Right.
And so I say, okay, well, I guess that's got something going for it. But yeah.
Well, shall we leave it there for today? And
sure, man, that's all right.
I've really enjoyed our conversation. We've had lots of people watching, lots of people commenting. I'm not sure you're actually in the Facebook group. Can I? Oh, I know Yvonne is. So you watch kind of.
Yeah, no, I get.
You watch from her account. Yeah.
Well, I tell you why I'm not in the Facebook group is because Yvonne won't let me be. She said I don't know how to use it, and that's true. I don't.
You might press the wrong buttons and delete her account by mistake.
I'm not worried one little bit whether I'm in it or not.
Well, you are in it now, and I value Yvonne being in it as well.
Yvonne shares with me. She might bring her computer to me and say, "Oh, have a look at this comment."
Yes.
I say, "Yeah, great. Well, that's a good comment," or "Nah, that's a lot of rubbish." And but as far as dialoguing with people and whatever, God bless them, I say.
Yeah. And I think in discussions of you and I about doing this as a bit of a series and involving other people and my program, the Voice Life Fellowship, the thing to keep in mind for others watching it, we're not creating a movement or a church by doing this, but we're just creating, it's almost like a social group, isn't it? For people that are enthusiastic about common ground, the four gospels, teachings of Jesus. It's just a way to network and keep in touch and feel good about this message.
Yeah.
So well, thank you again, and let's keep in touch. Thank you again, everyone, for watching. And I'm just trying to find out where my graphics are going. We'll see you all again soon. Thanks, Cal Stewart.
Beauty. Bye.